The state of university in the UK. So we've got three sections in this video: the golden era of university, the current state of university, and the future of university. So without further ado, let's get into the golden era. And to do that, we're going to have to understand the history of university in the UK. So it all started with the University of Oxford. Teaching started around 1096, which makes this the oldest university in the English-speaking world. And around those times, in the medieval, Middle Ages, whatever you want to call it, there are a couple more universities which ended up getting established. Places like Oxford, Cambridge, St Andrews, Edinburgh. There ended up being about 7 of them. And they're called ancient universities. And these were all set up pre-1600. You can see here, like, they've got all this really old sort of architecture because they're from the pre-1600 period. Now, the next lot of universities wasn't really until 1900. There are actually only 3 universities in England that got established from 1600 to 1900. And that's because these universities like Oxford and Cambridge, they were actually trying to block new universities being founded because they basically wanted to keep a monopoly on universities, right? So Oxford and Cambridge, they don't want a whole bunch of random universities setting up because then they get competition, they'll start like losing students basically. But in the 1900s, they can't really do this as much because red brick universities, that's the next sort of section type of universities that got set up. This is like the name to them, because in the 1900s to 1950s, a whole bunch of universities got set up in cities, right? So cities like Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, Sheffield, so-called red brick, because they were built in cities. A lot of them were made of this sort of red brick, which you can see here, right? And then there was another sort of batch of universities. A whole bunch got set up in the 1960s. These are called plate glass universities, and the reason they're called that is because of, again, the sort of architecture of them. And they were all built of like concrete with glass, basically. That's where the plate glass comes from. They're all sort of, you can see this concrete, looks like an urban jungle, sort of concrete sprawl everywhere. Universities like East Anglia, York, Warwick, and Bath, effectively, these are the plate glass universities of the 1960s. But what's going on here, and why am I giving you an architecture lesson? Well, I want to talk about tuition fees, okay? So these ancient universities in the Middle Ages, medieval times, whatever you want to call it, there were tuition fees, okay, and these would be paid by wealthy families, and that makes sense, right? Because if you're like, think about like the 1300s, right? If you're some peasant who like works on the land, like farms the land, right? Of course you're not going to be going to university, right? The people who are going to university would be like the people with money, the wealthy people. So maybe like your father's like a lord or a duke or something like that. Then they're going to like pay for like the eldest son to go to university and study like theology, something like that. That's the sort of thing that would have been happening in these like pre-1600s times, okay? So there were tuition fees, but it was like the really wealthy people who were going there, so it wasn't really a problem for them. Then by the time it gets to 1900s, a lot more universities getting set up. So universities starting to get a bit more accessible. Okay, before it would have been only a few select families who could even get here, like 99% of people, no chance, right? Here it's becoming a bit more accessible, okay? But there are still tuition fees, and about 30% of university income was from tuition fees. They had like other sources where they'd get their income from, but 30% of it was from tuition fees, right? So again, if you're like some random chimney sweep from like the Victorian times, right, you're not going to have the money to go and like pay for student tuition fees to pay for university, because it's still like 30% of income. Okay, so it's a bit more accessible university, but it's still not available for most people, right? And this is when there became a new attitude from 1945. Okay, so obviously end of the Second World War. A couple of reasons for this new attitude. And this new attitude was basically for more people to go to university, okay? Because the Second World War, it highlighted society's need for science and sort of mass education, right? There's also the Cold War and international economic competition, which meant the UK sort of wanted everyone to be having that university education so it could compete as a sort of global economic superpower, effectively. So from 1945, they tried to push this, more and more people going to university. So local authorities began to pay students tuition fees, okay? So that people who otherwise wouldn't afford it would be able to go to university. They started to do that sort of unofficially, I guess. And then it actually became mandated in the Education Act 1962 that local authorities had to pay student tuition fees. Okay, so what does this mean? Effectively, university became free in 1962 because, as I say, they have this new attitude after World War II where they wanted more people to go to university, so it got made free in 1962, right? And this all links back to the plate glass universities. That's why there was a boom of plate glass universities, new universities being built in the 1960s. It was because now there were no tuition fees. a lot more people were going to university, right? So there were actually loads of these built. Before this, there were about 22 universities in the UK. After this, there were 23. So basically the number doubled just in the 1960s because of this sort of no tuition fees, meaning so many more people were now able to go to university. And this is why you could argue this sort of 1960s and onwards basically era was sort of the golden era. Yes, there were still advantages and disadvantages, right? But at the end of the day, this period was where people could go to university for free. There was no tuition fees from 1962. Okay, in other words, the golden era. Okay, this all changed with the Teaching and Higher Education Act of 1998. This is when tuition fees were introduced for the first time at £1,000 per year. Okay, and this sort of signals the end of the golden era. I'm going to move into the current state of university in the UK. So in 1998, the tuition fees got introduced at £1,000, and since then they've been rising. Okay, so they rose to £3,000 in 2006, and in 2012 they went all the way up to £9,000. And now this £9,000 here is actually supposed to be a maximum tuition fee. Okay, and apparently when it was brought in, they thought universities would only end up charging £6,000, right? So the maximum's £9,000. They thought universities would just charge £6,000, but oh, guess what? All the universities straight away just started charging the maximum at £9,000, right? And you can't blame the universities from a business perspective. If they can charge £9,000, they're not just going to charge £6,000, right? So basically, it was supposed to be a maximum, and the goal was supposed to be £6,000, but it ended up just being £9,000, right? Tuition fees. 2017, it got raised to £9,250, which is where it still is today. So it's basically £9,250 per year of tuition that you have to pay to go to university, right? But you have to give some props to the system here, okay? Because that £9,250 does have to be paid by someone, right? But you have to give some props to the system here, because in the UK we have student loans. And what that effectively means is you can get a loan for this entire amount, which means you don't have to pay anything up front, okay? So actually, at the point of entry, when you start university, university is completely free, okay? Because they'll loan you the whole amount. If you're here for like 3 years to do your £9,000 tuition fee, they'll basically pay the £27,000 for you up front, right? So you have to give some props to the system and be like, you know what, fair enough, that's actually decent, right? The thing is, with the student loan, you're then going to end up having to pay it off afterwards. Okay, so of course there's the advantage of you don't have to pay it up front, but there's a disadvantage of course, you then end up having to pay it basically over the next decades, as I'm going to explain in a second. So once you've got like your student loan, so if you do 3 years, it could be 27,000. Then they also have like a maintenance loan, which you might be eligible for, which basically gives you a loan for living expenses, and that could be up to about £10,000. Okay, so your maximum, you could end up having like £57,000, £60,000 of debt after doing 3 years of university, right? So you have £60,000 of debt, for example. How would you pay that off? Well, you pay it off through a student loan, okay? And how the student loan works is effectively all your earnings over £25,000, you get charged an extra, you have to pay 9% of your earnings to like the student loan. So you can think of it effectively like a tax, right? Because it gets paid like a tax. It might be called a student loan or whatever, but it gets paid for like a tax. Basically, all your earnings, you have to pay an extra 9% tax. Okay, so it effectively means for like several decades, you could be all your earnings, 9% is just automatically getting whisked away from some of those earnings, right? That's how the student loan gets paid back. So it's sort of, when you go to university, yep, fair play to the system, you're going to be able to get it to free at the start. But what it means is, once you graduate potentially and you get a job, once you start earning over £25,000, you're going to have to basically have this sort of 9% tax you're going to have to deal with. So if you've got bills or something, whatever, it doesn't matter, 9% of your salary over £25,000 is going to be taken away so that you can sort of pay that student loan back, okay? And this loan has got more difficult this year in particular, okay? So it used to be, basically it was 9% over £27,295, right? And after 30 years, it gets completely wiped. So as I said, you could end up having like a student loan debt of like £50,000, right? If 30 years pass and you still haven't managed to pay it off because you had like the 9% contribution hasn't been enough, then it just gets automatically wiped, okay? And then it just gets forgotten about, right? they've now changed this, okay? So the limit, so starting from September 2023, this is how the student loan now works. It's 9% over 25,000, which basically means you have to start paying the student loan back earlier. And also, it doesn't get wiped until 40 years. This is the one that I think is even big, because that's sort of, it's not necessarily too much, 25,000 to 27,000, like that change. But this one is a big one. That's an extra 10 years potentially where you may have to be like sort of sacrificing 9% of your earnings over £25,000, an extra 10 years. So before it would get wiped effectively when you're like 51 or 52, now you could be paying this 9% thing until you're like 61 or 62, right? So you got to think about it when you're going to university. That's a big financial burden potentially that you're going to have for the next 40 years, because basically 9% of your pay cut, of your pay over 25,000, is sort of getting whisked away. So you can see here, just as a sort of summary, the student loan, the way it used to work is on a £30,000 income, you'd pay £243 a year. And now it's like almost doubled to effectively £450 a year, which you'd have to pay with this new student loan. Okay, so that's something to look forward to. Basically, when you go to university, you have to take on this like massive debt, and you have to pay this student loan, which you're going to have to basically pay back for, could be up to 40 years, which is something to think about. But okay, fine. You have to end up paying a lot of money, right? And you get into lots of debt. But maybe university is really worth it. Okay, so if it's worth it, then it's like, okay, fair enough. But is university worth it? Is it worth getting this debt, which you have to pay off for 40 years? Well, let's have a look. I want to talk about grade inflation, okay? So in 2010, 15% of people achieved first-class honours degree. If you don't know, like first-class honours, that's the way they sort of grade things in university. First-class degree is, you probably can equate it to like an A-star sort of thing, right? Top grade, effectively. In 2021, 32.8% achieved a first-class honours degree. Okay, that's what grade inflation is, right? Somehow, over 11 years, effectively, basically the amount of people getting first-class degrees has doubled. And you might think, oh, okay, well, that's great. That means that I can go to university and I'm basically guaranteed to get like a higher grade, right? Well, what it means is, if everyone ends up getting higher grades, it means they're going to lose value. Okay, because here, it's like 15% of people have this first-class degree. It means if you have this first-class degree, like an employer is going to see that and they're going to be like, wow, that's really good. There's only 15% of people who can get that. Like, if I see a first-class degree person in front of me applying to my job, that's like, I want to consider that because that's really good. The problem is now, literally a third of people have a first-class degree. Like, it doesn't even mean anything. Like, before it was like, wow, 15%, this is like a top 15% person. Now it's like 1 in 3 people have this. No one really cares. And what that means is, say you like work really hard in your university, then you get a first-class degree. It's like, there were loads of other people who got a first-class degree who probably didn't even work as hard as you, right? So it's all your hard work was for nothing. Because there's people who probably don't even deserve a first-class degree getting given it. Right? And when they were looking at this increase, right, they were trying to think, oh, well, maybe the teachers have got better. Okay, maybe just in the past 11 years, the teaching has got better, so that's why we've seen more increases. No, that didn't explain it. Okay, another one was, maybe we just have clever students, right? Maybe just like the IQ of people in the past 11 years has increased, has doubled. No, that didn't explain it. These top grades are still unexplained, right? And what they mean by still unexplained is, it's unexplained for any like real reasons, like, as I said, education increasing, people's intelligence increasing. It basically means is half of these grades are from grade inflation. Like, they've just doubled in 11 years and there's no reason for it. The only reason for it is universities just giving out more top grades because they want to do better in their like ranking tables or whatever. Like, a university wants to say, oh, we're a better university by just giving out more of the grades that they want to give out. To basically make themselves look better. And it basically means degrees are sort of losing their value, right? Because you're getting to a point where like you're paying all this money, getting into the debt, all this sort of thing, and then it's like your degrees like losing value in real time as this grade inflation happens. Because it just means everyone ends up just having really good grades, so it sort of just accounts to nothing really. So that's grade inflation. That's one thing to think about. The next one's graduate schemes. So graduate schemes is like that's potentially for a lot of people, that's like the end goal after going to university. Effectively where like you'll do your university degree and then you enter like a graduate scheme, could be 1 year, 2 year, 3 years at like a big company. And it's sort of like an introduction to that company, early career sort of thing. And then you do that, and then at the end of the graduate scheme, you might potentially have like a full-time permanent job at the company, right? So graduate schemes are a big goal for a lot of people at university. Graduate schemes are highly competitive. Okay, I've got some figures for you here. Civil service graduate scheme, which is a very popular one, 2% of applicants get in. Okay, which effectively means there's you and 49 people applying for the same position. Like, you have to be better than 49 people. Okay, engineering sector, it's 2.5%, which to visualize you need to be better than 39 people. Finance sector, it's 1%. So you literally, out of 100 people, you have to be the best candidate there. Okay, 1% is very difficult. And it's actually, I've heard people say that at some big four companies, basically like the biggest companies in the finance sector, big four companies, for some roles, the applications to like the admissions to applications ratio, places to admissions, is 1 in 700. Okay, so like 1 in 700 people are applying for the same position, and one person's going to get it. That's what I've heard. Right, so they're highly, highly competitive. A lot of people end up struggling to get a graduate scheme. So you, as I said, you go to university, you basically get into this debt, this burden, which is going to be with you for up to 40 years, and then you might even struggle to get a job afterwards, right? In terms of the graduate scheme, but let's say you even do get into a graduate scheme. Okay, so let's just ignore the fact that it's very difficult. Let's just magically say, no, you know what, you got into the graduate scheme, congratulations, right? Well, salary is at the lowest it is in 10 years. Okay, so effectively you've got this university debt and burden for the next 40 years, and what you're getting in return is like the lowest salary that is in a decade, right? So it's not even like necessarily you go to university and it means you can get a really well-paying job. It's like, not necessarily, right? And then retention's at a low of 72%. Okay, and this, I don't know, this might actually seem high to you. 72% is not high. Like when I was expecting this, I'd have thought, oh, retention will be like 95%. 72%, that's not high. That means if there's 4 of you, 1 of you is going to be got rid of at the end of your scheme, right? Which is high odds. Like I would genuinely expect 95%, 96%, 97%. 72% is low. Okay. This might seem, oh, okay, fine. There'll be something. By the way, let me just explain. Retention is like when you get to the end of your graduate scheme, say it's 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, are you kept on by the company in a permanent position? Okay, so if you're kept on by the company, that's you being retained. If you just get like you just sort of contract or whatever ends, and then you have to go and find a different company, that's not getting retained. Okay, so you'd have to go out, search for another company. All the other companies have their own graduates. There's not many like job vacancies, that sort of thing. That's what retention is. You might think, oh, this is just some like weird companies who have bad retention. Like the company I'll go to, they'll retain me, right? But no, this is like some real companies that a lot of people want to apply to, some attractive companies. I'm going to go through 2 companies now. These 2 companies, potentially you might even want to apply to. Just bear in mind that these companies have retention issues. Okay, so one example is PwC. Basically, very recently, only a couple of months ago, PwC told its graduates that they had to stay on as graduates for an extra 6 months. Okay, so they got to the end of their graduate scheme, right? Where they then expect to go into a permanent position where you're getting a pay rise and you're like going into the permanent position. They didn't get that pay rise. They had to stay on as graduates because there wasn't enough work for them to get the promotion. Okay. So you've done all this work, gone through university, got whatever degree grade you've got into all the debt, got into the graduate scheme, done the graduate scheme, and then you're not even going to get rewarded for it because you're not even going to get promoted because they don't even have enough work to promote you, right? And then at Deloitte, at the end of last year, they made 150 graduates redundant. Okay, so those are effectively your prospects for graduate schemes, and they don't necessarily look too good, that's basically the current state of university. To summarize it, it's basically you're going to get into a whole load of debt. There's grade inflation, so potentially like the value and quality of your degree is questionable. And then on top of that, your job prospects, especially in terms of like graduate schemes and working at the big companies, they aren't the best with like your university. Okay, so that's the current state of university in the UK. So what we're going to get into now is we're going to get into the future of university. Okay, so let's just look at this from a political landscape. As I'm filming this, we've got an election in a couple of weeks. Maybe if you're watching this, you know the result of it. But for me, it hasn't happened yet. Still got a couple of weeks before this election. Does there look like there's going to be any change to like tuition fees? No, not really. So in like 2017, 2019, 2020, there were particular people saying that they wanted to basically abolish the tuition fees, basically make university free. Remember what I said was £9,250. They wanted to make that free. That's not really a thing anymore. All the people have dropped that who promised that effectively, because it wouldn't really be viable. So that doesn't look like it's on the table at the moment. And the tuition fees looks like it's here to stay. That's not going to change anytime soon. It's going to be £9,250 moving forward. It's not going to get any lower than that. Let's talk about the economic landscape. Okay, so statistics show that the average cost of tuition at a university is £11,000. Okay, just think about that for a second. Remember what I said. The tuition fees that we're paying are £9,250, right? Average cost is £11,000. Goes up to £12,500 for Russell Group universities. Russell Group are it's like a group of effectively the best universities in the UK, right? So universities are actually losing £2,000 or £3,000 on you as a student when you go to university. And right now, 40% of universities currently operate at a loss. Okay. Statistics going forward in the future. 64% of universities are predicted to be operating at a loss by 2026 if student numbers stay constant. You can see why, because they're effectively like the tuition just costs more than you're paying, right? So 64% predicted to be operating at a loss if student numbers stay constant, right? And you might see where I'm going with this. What if student numbers don't stay constant, right? So we're going to quickly come to international students. Universities make their money from international students. They make up about 24% of the student population. They basically don't have that limit. We have that limit of £9,250. That's the maximum we pay. There's no limit for international students. So on average, it's £22,000 tuition fee for these international students. So that's where they can make the money, right? Because average cost of tuition is about £11,000. They charge on average £22,000. Okay, so that's where they make a profit from these international students. And although the average is £22,000, it can vary for universities. For example, this is a real invoice for a degree from Imperial College London, £40,000, £40,940 to be specific, right? So international students, that's how they make the money. Here's the problem: 33% less study visas have been issued this year compared to last year, right? And there's various political reasons because they've changed the system, right? But 33%. And what that means is if there's less international students, which is basically you have to get a study visa, if there's less study visas, there's less international students, and that's going to mean less money for universities because that's where they make their profit. And if there's less of them, they're going to make less profit. Remember here when we said 64% are predicted to be operating at a loss in 2026 if student numbers stay constant. If they actually drop, which is what it looks like they potentially might because international students are dropping, 89% are predicted to be operating at a loss. Okay, so that is a very interesting statistic. As we're seeing this sort of drop in international students, that is going to potentially cause a drop that causes 89% of universities predicted to be operating at a loss. Okay, so the future of university, what does it look like? The tuition fee is not going away. You're going to have to pay that. And then number two, universities are not in a good place economically, right? If universities had stocks on the shares on the stock market, I personally wouldn't be buying them because from my analysis of the situation, it doesn't look good for them economically. It just looks like they're going to be losing more and more and more money. And you got to think about that from a practical perspective of how that's going to affect you if you go to university. When there's 89% of universities predicted to be operating at a loss, the quality of education is going to be going down. They're not going to be able to afford the best teachers or the best materials or the best resources or the best support or this sort of thing because they're operating at a loss. So you just have to think about it in the future. As universities end up having less and less money, the quality of your education and the quality of your degree potentially could be going down. Okay, because they simply don't have enough money to continue to give such a high quality education. Okay, so there we go. That is the future of university covered in the UK. Hope you've learned something from this. I just want to cover, if there's someone watching this video who maybe you're in sixth form or college or you're a bit younger and you're still deciding if you want to go to university in the UK, what should you do? Well, I can't give you like specific advice because your situation will be different. You want to study different things. You got this background, whatever, etc., etc. So I can't really give you any specific advice. I'll do this because it's going to be different for everyone depending on your circumstances, right? But I just hope in this video it sort of opened your eye and you sort of learned something new potentially about university that can help you like decide, right? But I just want to give a sort of mention, right, to one thing in particular, right? So if you're interested in engineering, technology, or finance, then I just want you to have a think about degree apprenticeships, right? Because degree apprenticeships are now widely considered the better option in the industry. Okay, so a lot of people, like parents, for example, in particular, aren't too fond of degree apprenticeships because it's like not university and they want like their son or daughter or whatever to go to university. But actually in the industry, degree apprenticeships are now widely considered the better option. Okay, so you do go to university and you get a free degree. You don't have to pay that $9,250 a year. You don't get that student loan we mentioned. You get a free degree and you're getting a salary, which could be upwards of £25,000 in year one. So like, say you do your A-levels in year 13, you could be earning £25,000 the year after year 13. So no student debt, invaluable work experience and networking opportunities you're going to get from this degree apprenticeship. And you're virtually guaranteed a job at the end, which means you're not going to have those retention issues that I mentioned for graduate schemes, right? So if this sounds interesting to you, I just want to introduce myself. My name's Owen. I'm a degree apprentice and I help degree apprentices. What I did last year was I basically helped a whole bunch of people get degree apprenticeships from companies like JLR, HSBC, KPMG, Amazon, Rolls-Royce. So if you are interested in this degree apprenticeship route, you don't even have to be fully committed to it. That's the thing. It's just if you want to think about it and just sort of leave it as an option that's open, then what you can do is go down to the first link in the description, because that's where I have my program where basically I help people get degree apprenticeship offers. We've had some insane results, as you've seen on the previous slide, and you can see from these on here. So if you're interested in that, go in the first link in the description. I'll be able to help you with getting a degree apprenticeship. But that's the end of the video, and thank you for watching this video. I hope you've learned something new about university. I hope you found it useful. See you in a bit. Have a great rest of your day. Peace out.